Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the MSCC AI webinar series. Um, we are going to talk about AI tools that you can use today, no coding required. My name is Amanda Tan, and I'm the Associate Director for Research Development with the MSCC, and I'm joined today by Pavan Nara, our AI Technical Specialist. In our first webinar, which was held about 2 weeks ago, we focused more on foundational concepts, what AI is, how these systems work at a high level, and why AI is becoming increasingly relevant across research and higher education. Today, we want to shift from concepts into practical workflows. So this session today is really focused around helping faculty, researchers, instructional staff, and administrators think about how these tools can realistically fit into day-to-day work, not in a hype-driven way, but in a practical and usable way. So before we start, there are a couple of logistical things that I would like to touch upon. One is that this session is being recorded. You can also use the Q&A to ask questions. All recordings will be posted to our MSCC website. So let's get started with the agenda. Today, we'll talk about why AI adoption can feel difficult, and we'll move into practical workflow examples across teaching, research, and administrative work. We'll also discuss prompting, notebook LM, reusable AI assistants like GPTs and GEMs, and then briefly introduce some emerging concepts like RAG embeddings and lightweight AI application development. Our goal today is not to turn anyone into an AI engineer. It's not zero to AI engineer in 50 minutes, but the goal is really to help you leave with at least one workflow or idea that you can realistically experiment with after the session. Next slide, please. So one thing we've consistently observed is that most people are not actually asking, how do I use AI? Most often people are now asking, is this useful in my role? What data is safe to use? Can I trust the outputs? How do I validate what these systems are producing? And honestly, where do I even begin? Since there are so many tools out there, how do I choose between ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and every other named tool that you can think about? Especially in research and higher education settings, there are additional concerns around things like privacy, policy, reproducibility, academic integrity, institutional expectations. So one of the major ideas that we want to emphasize today is that AI adoption is not only a technology problem. It is also a workflow and decision-making problem. Next slide, please. So with that, I will hand things over to our AI technical specialist who will walk you through prompting and workflows and all the fun tools. So Pavan, you can take over now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that. So we have just seen how Amanda outlined how AI adoption often feels difficult. Now, the next step here is to realize that effective AI use is not much about clearer prompts or having big prompts and such that it is more about designing good workflows. So instead of using AI and saying, "Can you please do this task?" we should start defining how a task should be actually approached and what context actually matters. What requires human judgment. So now, as we move on from prompting to workflows, that is the main shift as we discussed so far. So most, as for example, if I want to do a task, I will go to AI and I say that, "Can you please do this task for me?" Or "Can you summarize this? Can you explain this?" I mean, we do add, context, role, and etc. That does work greatly because these AI assistants are has a very great knowledge. So if I repeat the same task in a couple hours or in a couple days, I might get a different structure or a different level of detail itself or a different quality of output. So a workflow actually solves that problem. So it defines what we provide, what AI should actually do, what format are we actually expecting, and how to validate the result at the same time. So when we discuss this, so for faculty, it might be assignment designing or planning a lesson. For researchers, it might be about brainstorming. It might be summarizing the state of art existing on different techniques or literature review support. For staff, it might be policy interpretation, meeting summaries, etc. So the goal here is not about replacing your subject matter expertise. It is more about reducing your cognitive overhead. Now, the next question that we actually ask is, how do we make these workflows actually usable? So that is where, you know, sorry, yeah. So that is where I think a simple workflow will come into picture. So as I advised, so there are various steps for solving a problem using a workflow. So it starts with your real material. So we want to make sure the AI assistant walks through only our specific materials. It does not go out of and create fake citations or fake references. It works in the resources that you provide. And the second step would be structuring the problem so that it understands what you're actually trying to solve. It is not the complete problem or a specific piece. So, what are you trying to make use of AI here? And the third most step is generating a useful output. Of course, AI takes the complete work on this step, but here comes the most important one, which is validating the result. So how do we actually validate the result? We should have specific parameters or specific limits of what are we actually expecting. Because AI can write as much as it can because it is trained to be a text-based agent or an image generation agent. It can do that. But you should have a validation saying that what is right and what is not. Now, the next question, as I mentioned, is how do we actually use these workflows? We can define workflows as day and day, but we still need to define them, right? So how do we do that? That is where practical AI workflows come into picture. For different roles, the task can be different. For example, faculties, it can be assignment redesign. For research, it can be summarization, or for staff, it can be documentation or policies. But what are we actually trying to do is use a specific workflow which does the whole task as you want to it. So that is where we bring, custom GPTs and gems, because custom GPTs and gems are ways where, we package a workflow into a reusable assistant. So here is a key part. The important parts, such as name, description, or instructions, are usually the same. So even though the interface changes or the platform changes, but the actual input that you're actually giving to it usually remains the same. Now I'll show a very brief creation path. I don't want us to stuck on the interface itself because the design thinking actually matters more than in the interface or the platform. So um, first, let's look at ChatGPT. So, how do we create a custom GPT on ChatGPT? So, we have to go to the home screen where on the sidebar you can see GPTs. As you click Explore GPTs, you can see a Create button on the top right corner. When you click Create, you have a great interface here. So you can define what you want your GPT to look like? What are the different, tasks it can do? Or what are the different validation points that the agent has to keep in mind? So you'll describe that here and it will create the agent for you. Or if you have predefined instructions or description and a name, you can define them directly here. And once you enter all these details, you can also add what are the different capabilities that you want your AI to have, such as web search, canvas, image generation. So you can select these as you need for your specific assistant. And once you fill in all these details, you can just click create so that this helps you to create a simple AI assistant on ChatGPT. Now let's look how does that work on Google Gemini as well. When you go to Google Gemini, it works in a similar way, as I said, for a different interface. it is named as gems. So you have to go here and click on new gem. And in the same format as we mentioned before, you have to have your name, description, and instructions. So you don't have to work around what the name should I give, what is the description that should I give. So it depends upon what you are trying to achieve. So here the workflow becomes reusable. The name is what you tell the user. For example, if the user tell example it says that AI assistant maker, that's the name. And the description tells them when to use it. And the instructions define the behavior of your AI assistant, the boundaries, the questions your custom GPT or GEM should ask, or the procedure the assistant should follow. In the same way, as I mentioned before, with ChatGPT and GEM, you have the same fields such as name, description, and instructions. Now let's look into our first workflow and decide how to use AI safely for a specific task. I'm going to reiterate a specific thing that I have in mind, which is I'm not going to show these tools about how the interface works or how the buttons actually matter. The interface might change, the tool might change. For example, you might use ChatGPT, someone else might use Claude, someone else might use Google Gemini. Even though all these platforms change, what matters here is the workflow. So the problem, what is the problem that we are solving? What are the inputs that are actually needed? And what output do we expect? And how do we verify it? These are the key factors that we have to keep in mind when we create custom GPTs and Google Gemini gems. So the first workflow that we are going to discuss about is an AI use case navigator. So this workflow solves a very common problem that we actually face. Let's take a person wants to use AI, but they don't know whether it is appropriate or is it the right tool to use, or whether the data is safe or not, or how to validate an output that AI actually generates. What we are trying to deduce here is not a prompt generator, it is a decision guide. So the assistant should be able to understand what is the user's role, what is the task, what is the sensitivity of the data, what are the different available tools, and you know, and then it should recommend a safe workflow. Now let's use a simple example, and we already have created an existing, uh, you know, a custom agent. Let's try and use that, and let's see how does it actually work. So this is the AI use case navigator that we have designed upfront. And in the further next steps, we'll also see how to design one and what kind of instructions that you want to give it. So let's try to use this. So I'm going to use a specific prompt which defines about how a faculty wants to improve an assignment and understand how students are taking in information and how they are going to use it. So this is the custom agent that we have defined, and I'm going to paste the prompt here. As I said, it is about a faculty member teaching a graduate course, and they want use AI to understand how students are working on assignments, quizzes, discussions, and improve it so that it is more about students grasping it. So let's see what the custom agent has to say about this. So when I gave the prompt, it starts with an AI useful decision. So I'm not going to read the whole response here. I'm trying to understand that. As you see here, it is trying to say that whether AI is right or wrong. And at the same time, what is the recommended workflow and how should I handle my data? And at the same time, as you can see, there is a step-by-step process. In this way, it as we defined before, we are working on three different categories, which is assignments, quiz, and and a discussion. So it is giving me a step-by-step guideline. So it is within what I want the AI to do. So now let's not discuss about whether you know it has used what kind of data, what are the different input that it actually requires. You can also upload files, images, and etc. But it actually comes back to what you're trying to achieve. So notice what I'm actually giving to it. Let's go back to the prompt and let's see. So I'm giving it a task, and what is the preference that I have? For example, I'm saying that the preference is student may use AI, but I want to assess their own reasoning. That is the policy. And the data is I'm not giving out any data. And what is the desired output? I want to see a safe workflow and a validation checklist. Now, as you can see on the screen, so this is a structure I'm actually looking for. So this is useful because I have a vague intention. Now I'm turning it into a safe plan. But here is a checkpoint that we have to keep in mind. AI can recommend a workflow as it is doing on the screen, as you can see that, but it cannot decide your own institutional policies. That is where we have to have a human in a loop checkpoint, where we say that you have already done the first step, which is asking an AI, but you don't have to accept it. Try challenging it. For example, what's wrong with a specific step? What am I actually missing here? Is there any specific point which could actually fail? This all happens when you actually have the will to work on the response that AI gives. You don't trust it, but you go defensive upon it. Now, let's look on to whether deciding, I mean, let's move from deciding whether AI is good or not to redesigning an actual teaching task. So, yes, just a sec, please. Yeah. So, as we see in nowadays, uh, if you're going with generic assignments or generic problems for students, AI can already do that. But what we can actually need to make through is student needs to learn from it, and at the same time they need to provide the right ideas where you ask, is this the point where it actually breaks, or is there anything else? You have to make sure that AI not just produces it, but also we are not trying to ban AI here. We are making sure that student thinking is actually visible. So this workflow actually checks what AI can complete easily, whether student needs to demonstrate, and what evidence need to be added to the process. So I'm going to use a short, simple uh, prompt, which is about my own assignment in cybersecurity. Let's use a Gemini gem for this. So we have already designed a AI resilience checker custom gem for this. Let's going to use that. Now, here the prompt is, so let's look at the prompt. So the prompt is about, it is a 5-page report. What about cybersecurity, existing phishing attacks, and what are the different prevention strategies? Now, as we know, if student needs to do this, they need to go to internet and go on to OWASP, NVD, and different platforms and scrape the information. Now we know that AI can do this task very well. Now, what I'm trying to do is my AI policy is limited AI usage, but students should disclose how they are actually using it. At the same time, I'm saying that I want you to evaluate the assignment for AI vulnerability and suggest a redesigned version. Now, let's see what happens when I give it to my custom gem. Yeah. So, I'm not trying to read the whole response here, but I'm trying to highlight a couple things. So as you can see, it is trying to redefine what I've said so far, which is what kind of assignment it is, what is the course level, what is the learning goal, and what is the AI concern that we have over here. And after that, if I say, okay, so should I, it is great. Let's say redesign. Let's try to keep it very simple and let's see what the output can actually generate here. So as you can see, It has provided me a snapshot of the assignment. At the same time, it has provided me an AI vulnerability score. So it says that the assignment here is completely vulnerable and AI can do this very easily. And it also gives you an explanation why it thinks so and what AI can complete easily and what a student still need to demonstrate. So, and you have a revised assignment here, which also defines the required evidence and deliverables at the same time. By doing this, what I'm trying to say here is this is the value that we are actually looking for. This might be an initial version. You might need to develop from here on and add more elements, more effective details for it. But it does not just rewrite the assignment we defined here. It helps us ask what is the assignment actually measuring for students? Where can AI can take a short? I mean, students can take a shortcut using AI, and what evidence would actually show students ideology or reasoning again. So the human decision is actually important, and which is still ours, by the way. So we design whether the assignment which has been redesigned, whether it's appropriate, whether it's fair, and also aligned with the course constraints that you have. For example, what are the objectives that you want to take out of this assignment? Now, the next workflow we are going to discuss about is research and administrative reading. So, most of the time, we do use AI for summaries and etc. But trusting summaries blindly is not the right way, but triaging evidence is. So now let's see how to define a custom agent and how to use it at the same time. So we already have a predefined rules. So I'm not going to define the instructions and everything here. So we already have a custom defined assistant. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to use my chat GPT and I'm going to say that this is what my custom agent is about. Help me design a custom GPT with following details. As you see on the screen, what I'm trying to provide here is what is the purpose of the custom GPT and what are the inputs that I'll be going to give. You can change these inputs and you can change the outputs and different details of your own GPT if you use that. But make sure that you have an initial version. You don't have to write, 100 lines of instructions. You can just use ChatGPT or Gemini because it helps you write a good version of what we actually think. Now, at the same time, let's also provide a validation checklist saying what it should not actually cross. So I'm actually mentioning everything in layman terms. I'm not trying to go out of box. So let's define a validation checklist as well, which says a custom GPT should not give up anything upfront. It tries to understand what is the task in hand. And once it has a complete understanding, it should provide you an output. At the same time, I'm also saying that after the output, we also need to understand how the GPT has come to that specific idea. We also want to understand the whole process of it defining something. So I've just said this. Now we'll have a short description, a purpose, what are the different inputs that we can actually provide. So these are the custom instructions that ChatGPT has provided. Now it looks actually great. It has a great, as you can see here, it says this is the output structure and it defined various elements in it. And it does provide instructions such as being specific and not saying it depends on I mean without explaining what it is. So in this way, as you can see here, it has a great response and it feels I mean it looks great, by the way. It does great with, as an AI engineer, what I actually do. But here comes the part. Here is the where human in the loop should come into picture. We are not trusting the response here. We have to read it, the whole response, and try to understand whether the specific instructions that it is providing or the short description it has provided us, does it match what we want for our specific assistant or the specific GPT? Do you need to have additional instructions or do you need to add additional details to it? In this way, when we define and once you use an AI assistant, you will get a definite response. But the point is, how do you actually treat it? Do you trust it? Do you want it to do more work for you? So that is what we are trying to evaluate here. So the important part is not about you know how it is actually deducing it. It is more about the output format. I want the claims, I want the evidence, I want the methods, I want the limitations, and etc. Because this is what is completely different from a generic summary. So, as we have seen here, now this is how we build a reusable assistant from a single prompt. We are not asking the AI to summarize it. We are trying to define a review process. Now, so far, we have seen a couple of workflow examples. I'll try to reiterate one at a time. The first one is AI use case navigator, and we did see how it actually works. And after that, the secondary workflow is AI proof assignment redesign. We actually gave it a specific assignment on 5-page report. It gave me a vulnerability score. It gave me various inputs on how can I actually improve it. Now, as an instructor, as a professor, as a GA or TA, I need to take this input and I need to improve my assignment so that my students or you know all the, who is actually studying the specific course need to get something out of it. And the third one that we actually seen is how to build one. So far we have seen various workflow examples. Now let's take a step back and understand some prompting fundamentals which is behind all these prompts. Yes. So the pattern behind all these three workflows that we have defined so far is actually very simple. Strong prompts includes what is the role that you are trying to define, what is the task, what is the context, what are the constraints, and what is the output that you want to see, or the format of the output that you want to see. Once you have defined that, but you also need to be careful that prompting is not about providing some niche words or having some magic wording. It is more about providing better context, because as AI assistants, they do have impeccable knowledge about different fields, different languages, different fields of science. But you, as a professor, you, as an instructor, you, as a researcher, have your own subject matter expertise. You have your worldview, and you want AI assistant to get that worldview and work on it. So if a model give you a weak answer, do not just say, can you please try again? But ask yourself, did you define the role well? Did you define the task in hand very well enough? Do you need to provide more context? Do you need to, define what is the output that you want to get out of it? So in this way, if you do this, you'll get better outputs out of it. And after you get the output, even though it's great, always ask, what's wrong with this? Is there anything that you're actually missing? Is there any specific point that the strategy it has defined or the workflow it has defined for you would actually fail? So this is the thinking process that we want you to achieve so that whenever you use an AI assistant, it's not about getting a response. It's more about making use of AI assistants in a far more better way. So prompting helps you in interacting with a model. It might be one-off prompting, but when we need a model to work with our own documents, that's when Notebook LM comes into picture. Just a bit preface about Notebook LM. It's a Google uh, product, which is more about using your own resources, and you can chat with your own documents. So what I mean by documents is not just PDF files or Microsoft Word docs. It's more about YouTube videos. You can have a plethora number of resources with different types of formats as well, and you can chat with them. You can have a generic understanding of and comparing different approaches. So let's look at what Notebook LM has in stage for us. So Notebook LM is more useful when you have a task and you have a source materials as well. As I defined before, these source materials does not need to be constrained within you know PDFs or documents and etc. It can be YouTube videos and etc. as well. So the value it provides is not that it actually knows everything about it, but the value is it can work with the only specific sources that you're actually giving. This specific task actually makes it useful for study guides, comparing different approaches, or understanding different techniques that various people have been using to solve a single problem, or literature review support, or study guides. At the same time, the output is not only in text. You can also get it in podcasts, you can also get it in mind maps, you can also create charts out of it. So the same rule applies here as well, which is uploaded sources do not remove the need for verification, right? They only improve they'll get you a more grounded response. But as a human, we have to make sure we validate what AI has been defining this. So once we understand that prompting and source based work, now let's think about reusable assistance. So far we have seen how to design a custom GPT or a Gemini gem, and how to use them, and what are the different fields that actually requires in defining them. Now let's compare different tools. So there are many names for reusable assistants. It can be, perplexity spaces, it can be custom GPTs, it can be Gemini gems, it can be, cloud projects. But it is not more about the tool, it is about what is the use case that you're trying to work with. A reusable assistant should be actually narrow. Okay, it should do only one workflow that you're actually thinking about. What is the input that you need to provide? What is the task that it should consider? And what is the output that you need? So that is the only single task that it should keep in mind. For example, evaluating an assignment, or providing evidence, or summarizing meeting notes, comparing various tools, or helping you write for a grant, or helping with a grant idea. So the broader the assistant, the harder it will be for validation as well. So now we have seen what are the different tools that are actually available. Now let's see how one specific Gemini workflow that combines gems with Notebook LM. So this example matters because whenever you use an AI assistant, it shows how AI moves from general chat where you given one-off prompt, it gives you a response. It is more about a source-based workflow. Now let's head into Gemini and let's look how does that actually work. Now let's try to define another gem and another gem as well. So once I'm trying to create a gem, I need to give a name to it, and I need to add a short description, what it actually does. And after that, I'm also providing a couple of instructions to it. Now, as you see, there is a knowledge field, which is about once you give a specific knowledge to the gem that you're actually using. So you'll be able to use that specific knowledge whenever the AI is going to respond for a specific task that you have. So here you can add files as notebook LM. For example, there are various notebooks that I have. So if I use this specific notebook, it helps me in having responses from this specific notebook itself. So here the notebook works as a source collection. So the gem provides you the behavior of the task or the workflow, if I have to say that. But together, user asks questions against a defined set of materials. So where are these materials? They are hosted in a notebook, which actually structures your all types of sources. It can be documents, it can be YouTube videos, it can be audio, it can be video, etc. So this is especially useful when your goal is not about getting generic AI knowledge, but it is more about having approved documents, course materials, and internal guidance docs or research papers. So keep in mind that attaching these sources does not make AI better or does not make the answer automatically correct. It only gives the system more material to work from and very specific material to work from. We still need to verify what AI has trying to deduce or define here. So we have discussed different AI tools, how we can design them. Now we need to look at a bigger point about how prompting is bigger than AI tools. Let's head into that. Yes. Um, so prompting is actually the beginning of what we need to do. It is not the end because once you give a prompt, AI does provide you the whole response to it. But as organizations and institutions mature within AI use, we will actually need systems which are grounded in your own policies, your own policies and rules in that specific documents. It can be knowledge or workflows or eventually automation. So this is where I think concepts like RAG, retrieval and argumentation generation, embeddings or agents actually becomes more important. You don't need to master all these concepts today and become an AI engineer in a couple of days, but you need to understand that the future is not about just better prompts. It's about having better systems which can help you, understanding the task better and give a response which is very specific and limited, not limited by the way, very specific to your scenario or use case. So let's look at these three different things. Embeddings are basically meaning-based representations. Um, for example, if I say that useful, using, used, all these different words have similar meanings. So when you plot them on a graph which has various, axes, all the same meaning words actually cluster together. And if I say happened and used, these two are different words. These will be framed on a different way. So embeddings actually help systems search for meaning, not just exact words, even though they have different meanings. So if the word spelling is different, but the meaning is similar, so you can find the words better because AI does not understand a specific now, language. It might be English, Spanish, and etc. It understands in numbers. So that is where embeddings come into picture. Now, RAG means retrieving before even answering a specific question that user has actually asked. For example, instead of asking the model to answer for a specific grounded resources, the system retrieves relevant documents upfront and give the model the right context here. So that is how RAG actually works. Now let's go to agents. Agents are, to be very brief, they are systems which can follow steps and use tools and do your own task. So the common theme in embeddings, in racks, in agents is grounding. So what do I mean by grounding is giving it the right resources so that these three approaches help AI systems to work with your own institutional knowledge or organizational rules or privacies instead of going on generic knowledge with all the data on internet and scraping it. Now let's see how does Hugging Face come into all the dynamics of agents and stuff. So so far we have discussed about different commercial tools. It can be ChatGPT, Gemini, and etc. Now let's look at why Hugging Face actually matters. So it matters because it opens a door for you if you want to experiment beyond, generic chat interfaces. Because as we see on ChatGPT or OpenAI's ChatGPT or Google's Gemini, when you create reusable AI assistants, the fields are very similar. For example, name, short description, instructions, knowledge fields. So see, these are similar, but you want to go beyond that, not just providing them. That is where Hugging Face comes into picture. It gives you access to models, AI ready datasets, if I had to say that, or very lightweight deployment options. So for MSCC, this matters because many institutions that we work with needs way to learn, test, or share their own AI workflows without immediately building full production systems, which requires high technical you know language and base. So think of Hugging Face as a learning and experimentation layer. So far we have seen no code solutions, which is using ChatGPT or Gemini. Now let's go to no code to low code. Yeah. So this is a maturity path that we actually see here. So no code tools such as AI assistants, it can be Grok, Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT, which are very useful for immediate productivity. You can define a workflow, you can define an AI assistant in a couple minutes to couple hours. That is when we go a step up, that is where low code solutions such as Hugging Face Spaces, Streamlit, now Replit, these help you share simple workflows and demos. Now, the next step is having full stack systems, which gives you complete control. But as said before, it does require you a little technical investment as well. So the point is that, not everybody, needs to be an AI developer or a Python developer. But the point is that you should know which level fits your problem. So if AI assistance is solving your problem very well, that is great. But if you are looking to go to the next step, that is where Hugging Face, Shamelet, and Replit comes into picture. If you have the right technical knowledge, you can go on to full stack systems and build better systems as well. So that is more about going from no code to low code. And there are a couple of low code platforms as well. So if the goal is about defining AI workflows, you can use Hugging Face Spaces because it's a good starting point. And if you are more about using data and defining dashboards, so you can use Streamlit, which is often stronger. If the goal is about learning and coding practice, Replit can be useful. So keep this in mind that it might be AI assistants with different GPTs or different commercial products. Platform always comes second because what we actually need to have in mind is the workflow. Workflow always comes first. So that is what I wanted to say and what we wanted to discuss so far about defining AI assistants that you can actually, design today itself. You can use all this knowledge and use your own workflows and come with various AI assistants. And now I'll hand over to Amanda to, work on key takeaways and etc.
Great. Thanks, Pavan, for that wonderful introduction to tools for AI in research and education. So, hopefully, one thing that came through today is that the AI tools are really not one size fits all solutions. Different tools support different kinds of workflows, and effective AI use really depends much more on context, structure, validation, human aspect judgment than any single prompt. We really want to emphasize that prompting alone is not enough when you are looking at using AI tools for research and education. What becomes really much more valuable over time is the workflows, making sure that it's reusable, reproducible, and having thought integrated into the existing work. And especially in higher education and research settings, data awareness and validation remain extremely important. With that, we will open up the floor to this to Q&A. But in the meantime, while you're typing questions out in the Q&A, I also wanted to tell you what's next. So, as we mentioned at the start of this webinar, we started with AI foundations and we're moving into tooling. So, what's next is that we are putting on a session in June 17 that focuses more on introductory AI coding workflows, and we will be using Jupyter notebooks and pre-built materials. So today was really focused on practical no-code workflows and AI-assisted productivity. The June session is really intended more as a bridge into advanced technical engagement, especially for those of you who want to begin experimenting with simple models, building things like chatbot on a Google Cloud, for example, working more with data sets and integrating it into your AI models, and also learning more about how to design AI workflows, notebook-based AI workflows. So this session on June 17 would connect also into some of the broader MSCC activities. We are putting on potentially later in the fall things like an AI accelerator, AI hackathons, and then also bridging the gap between the foundations and our technical consulting. Let's see if we have some questions in the chat. If not, I do have a couple of questions for Pavan. Um, in the meantime, please put in your questions in the Q&A if you do have any. But here is one question for you, Pavan. So, what do you feel is the biggest challenge or barrier to AI adoption based on your role working with MSCC institutions thus far? And are there any specific workflows that you feel especially that are especially repetitive or time consuming that you think AI might help with?
That's actually great piece of questions. Starting with AI adoption, I think I mean, looking from what I've seen so far, working with various institutions, what we need to keep in mind is whenever we're working with AI, I mean, for example, let's take meeting summaries. So if you're using Zoom, Zoom does provide its own assistant. It does give you what happened in the meeting, what are the different, next steps that can be taken. But at the same time, as you know, researchers, professors, instructors, we have to come up with various ways to use them. For example, as we have seen in the meeting so far, we have defined three different workflows. Now, it is the initial version. So, the barrier, I think, is understanding what are the tasks that we actually do, and at the same time, how can AI augment onto it. It is not about replacing a specific piece of work. It is more about how to use AI so that as AI is actually transforming how we work in our daily life. For example, it can be in organizations or in institutions. We are actually being challenged to rethink about not just how it works with us, but also why we need to use them. So you should also explore to staying relevant and etc. But you know yeah, so it is more about understanding what you can do with AI and what parts can AI help you to augment your work. It is more about improving the efficiency. So that's what I would say for the first one. Can you please repeat the second one? I actually forgot about it. I'm sorry.
I think you answered the question really well. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on to something that I think is on everybody's minds right now. So I have a hardball question for you. So one thing that comes up very quickly in higher education and research settings is concerns around institutional policy, things like student information, research data, privacy boundaries. So when people begin experimenting with tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or even Notebook LM, right?
Mhm.
In your opinion, what kinds of institutional or data privacy considerations should you be thinking about before uploading the documents or building the workflows? How do you think about balancing experimentation with responsible AI use?
Mm, I mean, that's a great way of putting it, by the way. But you know, um, so the main purpose, I think, we need to understand that is first what kind of data is can be uploaded to AI assistants first. So it is, I mean, there are various ways what we can, I mean, gatekeep data, by the way. For example, if you have, student data that you want to work with and you want to understand how can, categorize students who are working well before AI and after AI. Now working with student data. What you can actually do is first, uh, you know, first go with a basic idea to AI and not giving it the right, all the data first, but trying to understand what your problem is and how can you actually work through it. And if you still need to analyze it, you need to go back to low code solutions where Hugging Space, Hugging Face Spaces comes into picture, where you can use a model which has been pre-trained on a pre-trained data set. Now your data isn't leaving your system here, so when you go on to AI assistants, you do provide it with data. So you can come back to the use case that we have defined about whether AI is right for your specific scenario. If it is, then it also defines how it can be used. If you have very specific data, you can go on to low-code solutions. And if you have the right technical team, you can go on to build production systems where the data and all the transactions will also be hosted on your server, which can be on native supported platforms and etc. as well. So yeah, that is more or less what I would say. The major when you work with student data or private data, if I have to say that.
So I think the key takeaway from that is that everybody on campus needs to work together to make sure that we all understand the data policies, institutional data policies, and the approved use of AI on the campus. Okay, with that, I think we are at the end of this webinar. So before everyone leaves, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to complete a short survey that will appear after the webinar. The feedback really helps us understand better what kinds of AI workflows, tools, and training opportunities that are most useful for the community. It also helps us shape the future of MSCC programming and workshops. It is very important for us to hear what you have to say so that we can respond. And I really want to thank everyone again for spending the part of your day with us. And we really hope to see you at the June 17th session. If you have questions, please reach out to us. Here are our email addresses. And again, this recording will be shared out on the MSCC website and sent to participants today. So thank you again, all. We'll see you on June 17. Bye bye.